What happens when a wife justifies her betrayal with her husband's best friend as just one mistake, only to discover her husband has been quietly building a case that will shatter her entire world? When I blame my drinking and his lack of attention for what happened that night, I never imagined he would stop arguing and start documenting everything instead. Now, standing in the courthouse lobby surrounded by lawyers and strangers, I'm holding papers that prove he wasn't broken, he was preparing. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I woke up that Tuesday morning to an empty bed, which wasn't surprising. The sheets on Marcus's side were pulled tight and cold, like he'd been gone for hours. Maybe he had. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling fan making its slow rotations, trying to convince myself that everything would blow over. It had been 3 days since the incident. I refused to call it anything else, and Marcus still wasn't talking to me. Not really talking anyway. The incident, that's what I kept calling it in my head. It sounded cleaner that way, less deliberate, more like something that happened to me rather than something I chose to do. I pulled on my robe and went downstairs. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of every footstep, every breath. I found Marcus in the kitchen, already dressed in his work clothes, standing at the counter with a mug of coffee. He didn't look up when I walked in. I tried to sound normal. I asked him if he wanted breakfast. He said no, just like that. One word. I asked if he'd slept okay. He said fine. I asked if we could talk about what happened. He finally looked at me then, and the emptiness in his eyes made my stomach twist. He said there was nothing to talk about right now. The way he emphasized right now made it sound temporary, but also like a door closing. I moved closer and tried to touch his shoulder, just a gentle hand, the way I used to every morning. He shifted away before I could make contact. It wasn't dramatic. He just stepped to the side to put his mug in the sink, but the message was clear. Don't touch me. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I wanted to explain again, to make him understand that it wasn't about him, that Connor and I had just been drinking, that it was a stupid mistake that meant nothing. But every time I opened my mouth, the words felt hollow even to me. I told him we needed to talk about this eventually. He said eventually wasn't today. Then he checked his watch and said he had to get ready for work. That's when Olive came bouncing down the stairs in her purple pajamas, her hair a mess of blonde tangles. She was 6 years old and still thought the world was simple. She asked for pancakes with chocolate chips, her favorite. I forced a smile and told her, of course, anything for my sweet girl. Marcus left the room without saying goodbye to either of us. I made the pancakes, going through the motions, while Olive chatted about a drawing she wanted to make for her teacher. She didn't notice that her father hadn't kissed her goodbye, or that I kept glancing toward the garage door, listening for the sound of his car starting, but he didn't leave right away. I was pouring syrup on Olive's plate when I heard his phone buzz on the kitchen counter. He'd left it behind. I glanced at the screen and saw the caller ID, private, not a name, not a number, just that word. Before I could even think about answering it, Marcus appeared in the doorway. He walked straight to the counter, picked up the phone, and looked at the screen. His expression didn't change. He swiped to answer and stepped into the garage, pulling the door closed behind him with a soft click. Olive asked me why Daddy was being so quiet. I told her he was just tired from work. She seemed to accept that and went back to her pancakes. But I stood there, spatula in hand, staring at that closed garage door. Through it, I could hear the faint murmur of Marcus's voice. Low, measured, not the tone he used for work calls or conversations with family. This was different, deliberate. I realized I was holding my breath. Olive asked if she could have more syrup. I said yes without looking at her. My eyes were fixed on that door, my mind racing through possibilities. Who was he talking to? Why was the number private? Marcus wasn't secretive. He'd never been secretive. He was the most straightforward, predictable man I'd ever known. That was part of the problem, wasn't it? That predictability, that boring, steady reliability that made me feel like I was suffocating. But now, standing in our kitchen listening to him have a conversation he clearly didn't want me to hear, I felt something shift. It wasn't guilt, not exactly. It was more like unease. The sense that maybe Marcus wasn't as broken as I'd assumed. That maybe, while I'd been worried about managing my own narrative, he'd been doing something else entirely. The garage door opened. Marcus stepped back into the kitchen, slipping his phone into his pocket. He picked up his laptop bag from the chair and told Olive to have a good day at school. His voice was warm when he spoke to her. Then he looked at me, and the warmth vanished. He said he'd be home late. He had things to take care of. I asked what things. He said just things. Then he left. I heard the garage door rumble open, his car start, the door close again, and then he was gone, and I was alone with Olive and a stack of chocolate chip pancakes and the growing sense that I'd miscalculated something important. Olive asked if Daddy was mad at me. I told her no. Of course not. Everything was fine. She looked at me with those big blue eyes that saw more than I wanted her to see, but she didn't push it. I cleared the dishes and got her ready for school, going through the morning routine on autopilot. But my mind kept circling back to that phone call, that private number. The way Marcus had immediately ended the conversation when he saw me standing there. He wasn't crying. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't begging me to explain or apologize. He was planning something. And for the first time since the incident, I felt a small, cold thread of fear. By the time I got to work that afternoon, I'd almost convinced myself I was overreacting. Marcus was hurt. Of course he was. But he'd come around. We'd been married for 8 years. We had Olive. We had a house, a life, a routine. People didn't just throw that away over one mistake. I'd barely sat down at my desk when Leona appeared beside me. Leona Moss was my closest friend at the office, one of those people who always seemed to know everyone's business before they did. She worked in social media management, which meant she spent half her day scrolling through other people's lives. She was good at it. Too good. She leaned against my cubicle wall and asked in a low voice if I was okay. She said I looked stressed. I told her I was fine. But my voice cracked a little, and that was all the invitation Leona needed. She suggested we grab coffee in the break room. I knew what that meant. She wanted details. We sat in the corner with our lattes, and I told her everything. Well, not everything. I told her my version. I explained that Marcus and I had been struggling for months, that he'd become distant and cold, that he never wanted to do anything spontaneous anymore. I said Connor had just been there at the party, that we'd both had too much to drink, that one thing led to another. I made it sound accidental, inevitable even. Leona listened with wide eyes, nodding in all the right places. She said she'd noticed Marcus seemed checked out at the company holiday party last year. She asked if I'd tried marriage counseling. I said I'd suggested it, but Marcus had refused. That wasn't entirely true, but it felt true enough. Leona said it sounded like I'd been emotionally abandoned long before anything physical happened. She said sometimes people pushed their partners into the arms of someone else without realizing it. I felt a little surge of relief hearing her say that. It validated everything I'd been telling myself. By the time we went back to our desks, I felt lighter. Leona understood. She didn't judge me. She saw what Marcus had done to me, even if he didn't. Around 3 o'clock, Leona stopped by my desk again. She said a few of us were going to the rooftop bar after work, and I should come. She said I looked like I could use a drink and some support. I hesitated for maybe 2 seconds before I agreed. The rooftop bar was one of those trendy places with string lights and overpriced cocktails. Our group claimed a corner table with a view of the city skyline. There were 5 of us, Leona, 2 other women from the marketing team, and a guy from sales named Brad, who always laughed too loud. The drink started flowing, and so did the conversation. Leona told the group that I was going through something and needed our support. I appreciated the vagueness, but of course, everyone immediately wanted to know what was going on. I gave them the short version. I said my marriage was struggling, that I'd made a mistake, and now my husband wasn't speaking to me. I didn't name Connor. I didn't go into details. But I made it clear that I wasn't the villain here. One of the women, Angela, said her ex-husband had done the same thing. The silent treatment, she called it, emotional abuse. She said men like that wanted you to feel guilty for their shortcomings. Everyone nodded. Brad said Marcus sounded like a stick in the mud. He asked if I'd ever seen him do anything fun or spontaneous. I laughed and said no, never. That wasn't quite fair, but the laughter felt good, and the group laughed with me. Leona raised her glass and made a toast. She said, "Here's to recognizing when we're not happy and having the courage to do something about it." Everyone clinked glasses and drank. I felt a warm rush of validation. These people understood me. They saw me as the victim. They saw Marcus as the problem. Someone asked if Connor was still in the picture. I said no, absolutely not. It had been a one-time thing, a stupid mistake. I said Connor had actually been Marcus's best friend, which made it worse, but also proved how neglected I'd been feeling. Angela said that was classic. She said when women felt unseen in their marriages, they gravitated toward men who actually paid attention to them. She said it wasn't my fault. She said it was human nature. I almost believed her. The conversation drifted to other topics, but every so often someone would circle back and make another comment about Marcus. How boring he sounded, how cold, how he was probably just trying to punish me. I laughed along, but somewhere deep down, a part of me felt uneasy. These were people who'd never met Marcus, who knew nothing about him except what I'd just told them. And I'd told them a version that made me look better. Around 9 o'clock, people started leaving. Leona and I were the last ones at the table. She asked if I was going to be okay going home. I said I'd be fine. She gave me a long hug and told me I deserved better. I thanked her and meant it. On the walk back to my car, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Simone, my younger sister. She asked if we could talk tomorrow. She said she'd heard some things and wanted to get my side. I frowned. Heard some things from who? I texted back asking what she meant, but she didn't respond. I was unlocking my car when I heard my name. I turned and saw 2 of my co-workers from a different department standing near the elevator entrance. They were whispering, and when I looked at them, they both quickly looked away. My stomach dropped. How much had gotten around the office already? Leona wouldn't have spread it, would she? I got in my car and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. I told myself it was fine. People gossiped. It would blow over. Marcus would forgive me eventually. We'd figure it out. But when I pulled into our driveway just before midnight, the house was dark except for one light, the upstairs hallway light. I walked inside quietly, careful not to wake Olive. I climbed the stairs and saw Marcus standing on the landing. He was in the dark, just outside the circle of light, and he had his phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking in that same low, measured tone I'd heard that morning. He saw me and stopped mid-sentence. He lowered the phone and ended the call without saying goodbye to whoever was on the other end. I asked who he was talking to. He said it didn't matter. Then he walked past me toward the guest bedroom at the end of the hall. Not our bedroom. The guest room. I called after him. I said we needed to talk. He said not tonight. His voice was calm. Too calm. Like he'd already made up his mind about something, and nothing I said would change it. I stood there on the landing, watching him close the guest room door. I heard the lock click. For the first time since the incident, I wondered if maybe Marcus wasn't going to forgive me. And more than that, I wondered what he'd been doing on those phone calls. Who he'd been talking to in that careful, deliberate voice. What he was planning in the dark while I'd been out drinking with friends who told me I was the victim. I went to our bedroom, my bedroom now, apparently, and lay down. But I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling, listening to the silence of the house, and wondering when everything had started to slip out of my control. The next few days passed in a strange, tense limbo. Marcus continued to sleep in the guest room. He spoke to Olive with warmth and attention, but to me, he offered only functional sentences. He asked if I'd picked up the dry cleaning. He mentioned that Olive needed new shoes. He reminded me about a parent-teacher conference next month. But he never asked how I was. He never brought up Connor, or the party, or what happened between us. It was like he'd filed it away somewhere and locked the door. I kept waiting for the explosion, for the tears or the shouting or the demands for an explanation, but it never came. On Thursday afternoon, I stopped at the supermarket to pick up groceries for the week. I was standing in the checkout line, scrolling through my phone, when I heard someone say my name. I looked up and saw Patrice Hayes, Marcus's mother, standing 2 lanes over. She had a cart full of vegetables and a tightly controlled expression. She walked over to my line and greeted me. Her voice was polite but cold. I tried to smile. I said it was good to see her. She said she'd been meaning to call me. I asked if everything was okay. She said that depended on my definition of okay. I felt my face flush. I asked what she meant. She said she'd spoken to Marcus recently, and he'd told her some things. She said she wasn't going to take sides, but she wanted me to know that Marcus was handling everything very well. The way she said handling everything felt loaded, like she knew something I didn't. I asked if Marcus was okay. She said he was fine. Better than fine, actually. She said he was being smart about everything. I asked what that meant. She said I'd find out eventually. Then she told me to take care of myself and walked back to her lane. I stood there, frozen, while the cashier scanned my groceries. My hands were shaking as I paid. That Saturday was Olive's 6th birthday. We'd planned a dinner at her favorite family restaurant, the kind of place with long wooden tables and balloons tied to every chair. Marcus's whole family was coming. My father and Simone were supposed to be there too. I spent the morning decorating the house and wrapping presents, trying to push Patrice's words out of my mind. When it was time to leave, Marcus drove separately. He said he had to pick something up first. I didn't believe him, but I didn't argue. At the restaurant, we were seated at a long table near the window. I'd orchestrated the seating so Marcus was at the far end, surrounded by his parents and his sister Juliet. I sat near the middle with Olive, Simone, and my father. I thought distance would make things easier. Olive was radiant, wearing her favorite purple dress and a sparkly birthday crown. She kept looking between me and Marcus, hoping we'd sit together, but I distracted her with presents and cake talk. The meal started off fine. People made small talk. Olive opened a few early gifts, and the waiters brought out a special birthday bread basket. I started to relax. Maybe this would be okay. Maybe we could all pretend for one night. Then Marcus's cousin Derek made a joke. He said Marcus looked like a robot lately, all stiff and serious. He asked if Marcus had forgotten how to smile. A few people laughed uncomfortably. I laughed too. I said Marcus had always been a little robotic. I said he wasn't exactly known for spontaneity or surprises. A couple of people chuckled. Simone shot me a warning look, but I ignored it. That's when Juliet spoke up. She said betrayal wasn't something you joked about. Her voice cut through the table like glass. Everyone went silent. I felt my face go hot. I said I didn't know what she was talking about. Juliet said yes, I did. She said cheating on someone and then mocking them in front of their family wasn't funny. It was cruel. The table was completely quiet now. Even Olive had stopped fidgeting with her napkin. My father cleared his throat and tried to change the subject, but Juliet wasn't done. She looked directly at me and said that no matter what problems existed in a marriage, betrayal was a choice. She said Marcus had been nothing but loyal and kind, and he deserved better. She said I should be ashamed. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to say that she didn't know the full story, that Marcus had been emotionally absent for years, that I'd been lonely and neglected, but the word stuck in my throat. Because across the table, Marcus was watching me with that same empty expression, and I realized that everyone here had already chosen their side. Patrice reached over and put her hand on Marcus's arm. Gerald, Marcus's father, nodded in agreement with Juliet. Simone was staring at her plate. Even my father looked disappointed. Olive asked why everyone stopped talking. I forced a smile and told her everything was fine. It was just grown-up stuff. She didn't look convinced. The rest of the dinner was excruciating. People made halting attempts at conversation, but the lightness was gone. I picked at my food and avoided eye contact. When the cake finally came out, we sang Happy Birthday, and Olive blew out her candles. But even that felt hollow. After dinner, people started saying their goodbyes in the parking lot. Juliet hugged Marcus and whispered something in his ear. Patrice kissed Olive and then left without saying goodbye to me. My father gave me a long look and said we should talk soon. Simone hugged me quickly and said she'd call. I watched Marcus walk toward his car. Olive was with me, holding my hand, clutching a bag of birthday presents. I saw Marcus unlock his car and noticed it was parked facing the exit. That was unusual. Marcus always backed into spaces. He said it was safer. I took a few steps closer, and through the window, I saw a folder on the passenger seat. It was labeled Household in neat block letters. There was a sticky note on the edge. I leaned in to read it and just made out the words, Bring forms. I heard footsteps behind me. Marcus's voice was calm as he asked me to step back from his car. I jumped and turned. He was standing a few feet away, keys in hand, watching me. I asked what the folder was for. He said it was personal. I said we were married. We didn't have personal. He said we did now. Then he unlocked the car, got in, and drove away. I stood there in the parking lot, holding Olive's hand, watching his taillights disappear. The folder was gone from the seat. He'd taken it with him. Olive asked why Daddy didn't drive home with us. I told her he had to run an errand. She asked if he was coming back. I said of course he was. But as I buckled her into the car and drove home through the dark streets, I wasn't sure I believed it anymore. The following week felt like walking through fog. Marcus moved through the house like a ghost. He was there, but not there. He made Olive breakfast. He helped her with her homework. He tucked her in at night and read her stories in funny voices that made her giggle. But he didn't look at me. He didn't speak to me unless it was absolutely necessary. And every night, he disappeared into the guest room and locked the door. Late one night, I couldn't sleep. I got up and wandered the hallway, and I saw a light under the guest room door. I pressed my ear against it and heard nothing. No TV, no movement, just silence. I tried the handle, locked. I went back to bed, but I couldn't stop thinking about what he was doing in there, what he was planning. The sticky note that said, Bring forms. The private phone calls, the folder. The way Patrice had said he was handling everything. The next afternoon, I found myself standing outside the guest room while Marcus was at work. The door was locked, but I knew where he kept the spare key. I told myself I was just checking, just making sure he was okay. But the truth was, I was scared of what I didn't know, scared that he was 3 steps ahead of me. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The room was neat. Too neat. The bed was made with military precision. His clothes were folded and stacked. On the nightstand, his phone was charging. I picked it up and pressed the button. The screen lit up with a calendar reminder. It said downtown 9:47 a.m. and had a repeat setting for every Thursday. That was tomorrow. I put the phone down quickly, my heart pounding. What was downtown? Who was he meeting? Why 9:47 specifically? I opened the nightstand drawer. Inside was a thin binder labeled Utilities. I picked it up and it felt heavier than it should. I started to open it, but then I heard the front door open downstairs. Marcus was home early. I shoved the binder back into the drawer, closed it, and hurried out of the room. I locked the door behind me and hung the key back on its hook, just as Marcus appeared at the top of the stairs. He looked at me, looked at the guest room door, looked back at me. He asked if I needed something. I said no, I was just checking if he'd left any laundry. He said he was handling his own laundry now. Then he walked past me, unlocked the guest room, and went inside. The door closed with a soft click. I stood there, breathless, wondering if he knew, if he'd seen the key moved or noticed the binder shifted, but he said nothing. The next day, I took Olive to the park after school. It was one of those warm, golden afternoons where the light felt soft and everything seemed okay for a moment. Olive ran toward the playground, her backpack bouncing. I sat on a bench and watched her climb the jungle gym. She waved at me, and I waved back. For just a second, I let myself believe that maybe everything would settle, that maybe Marcus's anger would fade, and we'd find some version of normal again. Then Olive climbed down and walked over to me. She sat beside me on the bench and looked up at me with those serious blue eyes. She asked why Daddy didn't hug me anymore. My throat tightened. I told her that Mommy and Daddy were just tired, that sometimes grown-ups needed space. She asked why Daddy slept in the other room. I said it was because he had trouble sleeping and didn't want to wake me up. She seemed to think about that. Then she asked if Daddy was going to leave. The question hit me like a punch. I told her no, of course not. I said Daddy loved her very much and he wasn't going anywhere. She asked if he still loved me. I said yes, even though I wasn't sure anymore. She nodded slowly, like she was trying to figure out a puzzle. Then she asked if we could all go to the zoo together soon. She said it had been a long time since we'd all done something fun. I promised her we would. I said we'd go to the zoo and get ice cream and spend the whole day together, just the three of us. She smiled, and I hugged her tight, trying not to cry. That evening, there was a fundraiser at Olive's school. It was held in the community center hall, one of those events where parents mingle and bid on silent auction items while kids run around eating cookies. I didn't want to go, but Olive had been excited about it for weeks. Marcus said he'd meet us there. When we arrived, I immediately felt the stares. Parents who'd always been friendly now offered tight, polite smiles. One mother, Karen, made a point of walking past me without saying hello. Another couple stopped their conversation when I approached. I found Simone near the drink table. She hugged me, but it felt stiff. I asked her what was wrong. She said she'd heard different versions of what happened, and she wanted to hear the full truth from me. I asked what version she'd heard. She said Juliet had called her. That Marcus's family was telling people their side, and it didn't match what I'd said. I felt anger flare up. I told Simone that Juliet didn't know anything, that Marcus's family was biased, that they were making me out to be some kind of monster when I was the one who'd been suffering in that marriage for years. Simone looked uncomfortable. She said she wasn't trying to take sides, but she needed to understand what really happened. I said I'd already told her. She said I'd told her a version. I asked what that meant. She said she'd heard that Connor and I had been texting for weeks before the party, that it wasn't just a one-time drunken mistake. My stomach dropped. I asked who told her that. She said it didn't matter. She said if it was true, I needed to own it. Before I could respond, I heard a voice behind me. Patrice was standing there, holding a cup of lemonade, looking directly at me. She said she didn't mean to interrupt, but she wanted to make something clear. She said Marcus deserved better than this. She said he'd been patient and kind and loyal for years, and I'd repaid him with betrayal and public humiliation. She said I could lie to myself all I wanted, but I couldn't lie to them. She said they knew the truth. I tried to stammer a defense, but Patrice turned and walked away before I could finish. Simone looked at me, her expression unreadable. I felt like the walls were closing in. Everyone was staring. Parents whispered in clusters. I saw Marcus across the room, talking to another father, and he didn't even glance my way. I grabbed Olive's hand and told her we were leaving. She protested, but I didn't care. I couldn't breathe in that room. As we were walking toward the exit, Olive tugged my sleeve. She looked up at me with worried eyes and asked in a small voice if Daddy was going to leave us. I froze. I wanted to reassure her. I wanted to tell her everything would be okay. But I couldn't find the words. Because standing there in that community center, surrounded by people who'd already decided I was the villain, I realized I didn't know the answer anymore. That night, after I put Olive to bed, I went back downstairs. I wanted to search Marcus's room again. I needed to know what was in that binder, what downtown 9:47 a.m. meant, who he was talking to on those phone calls. I grabbed the spare key and unlocked the guest room door. The room was dark. I turned on the light and went straight to the nightstand. I opened the drawer and pulled out the binder labeled Utilities. It was heavier than I remembered. I opened it and my hand started shaking. Inside were bills and bank statements and receipts, all organized into plastic sleeves. But beneath those, there were printed text messages, screenshots, dates and timestamps highlighted. I flipped through the pages, my heart pounding. There were messages between Connor and me. Flirty texts I'd sent, plans to meet up. Things I'd said about Marcus, how bored I was, how I needed excitement. There were also notes, handwritten notes in Marcus's neat handwriting. Dates, times, names, a timeline of events leading up to the party. Witness names. I was holding evidence. Marcus was building a case. I heard footsteps on the stairs. I shoved the binder back into the drawer and closed it just as the guest room door opened. Marcus stood there, still in his work clothes. He looked at me, looked at the nightstand, looked back at me. He didn't say anything. He just waited. I told him I was looking for a phone charger. He said mine was in the bedroom. I said I thought I'd left one in here. He said I hadn't. Then he stepped aside and gestured toward the door. I walked past him, my face burning. He closed the door behind me, and I heard the lock click. I went to bed that night knowing that Marcus knew I'd been in his room, that he knew I'd seen the binder, that he knew I was scared. And he still said nothing. The days after that were unbearable. Marcus didn't confront me about going into his room. He didn't mention the binder, or the text messages, or any of it. He just continued moving through the house like I wasn't there. But now I couldn't stop seeing the evidence, the screenshots, the timeline, the careful notes. He was documenting everything, every lie I'd told, every time I'd downplayed what happened with Connor, every moment I'd tried to shift the blame onto him. One evening, I found him on the balcony. The sun was setting, and the sky was streaked with orange and pink. He was leaning against the railing, staring at nothing. I stepped outside and tried to start a conversation. I said we couldn't keep living like this. I said Olive was noticing. I said we needed to work on us, to try to fix things. He turned and looked at me. His expression was calm, too calm. He said he appreciated my concern, but he was handling things in his own way. I asked what that meant. He said I'd understand when the time was right. I said we were married, we had a daughter. We couldn't just ignore each other forever. He said he wasn't ignoring me. He was protecting himself. I asked from what? He said from more hurt, more lies, more manipulation. I felt a flash of anger. I said I wasn't manipulating him. He said yes, I was. He said I'd been rewriting history to make myself the victim, and he was done listening to it. I tried to argue. I said he'd been distant for years, that he'd stopped paying attention to me, that I'd felt invisible. He said that wasn't an excuse. He said if I'd been unhappy, I should have talked to him, should have suggested counseling, should have done anything except betray him. I said it wasn't that simple. He said yes, it was. Then he told me, very calmly, that he was going to handle matters properly, through the appropriate channels. I asked what that meant. He said I'd know soon enough. Then he went inside, leaving me alone on the balcony. A few days later, I met Leona at a co-working space cafe near the office. I needed to vent. I needed someone to tell me I wasn't crazy, that Marcus was overreacting, that this would all blow over. We got our coffees and sat near the window. I started telling Leona about how cold Marcus had been, how he was treating me like a stranger, how he was sleeping in the guest room and keeping secrets. I said it felt like he was punishing me, dragging things out just to make me suffer. Leona listened and nodded and said all the right things. She said men like Marcus were control freaks, that they couldn't handle their egos being bruised. She said he was probably just trying to make me feel guilty so I'd beg for forgiveness. I wanted to believe her, but mid-conversation, I glanced across the cafe and froze. Marcus was there. He was sitting at a corner table with his laptop open and headphones on. He looked completely focused, his fingers moving across the keyboard, occasionally pausing to write something in a notebook beside him. He had a phone pressed between his shoulder and ear, clearly on a call. I watched him for a moment. He was too far away for me to hear what he was saying, but his expression was serious, determined. Leona noticed me staring and asked what was wrong. I pointed toward Marcus. She looked, and then looked back at me with wide eyes. She asked if I wanted to leave. I said no. I wanted to see what he was doing. We sat there for another 20 minutes, and Marcus never looked up. He was completely absorbed in whatever he was working on. At one point, he ended his call, made a few more notes, and then packed up his laptop. As he stood to leave, he glanced in my direction. Our eyes met. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look angry. He just looked at me for a long moment, then turned and walked out of the cafe. Leona said that was creepy. She asked if he was following me. I said I didn't think so. But the truth was, I wasn't sure. Was he following me? Or was this just a coincidence? And if it was a coincidence, what was he doing here in the middle of the day, working on something so intently? That evening, I saw Marcus on the metro. I'd stayed late at work and was riding home during rush hour. The train was packed, and I was standing near the doors when I spotted him a few feet away. He didn't acknowledge me. He didn't even look at me. He was standing with one hand on the pole, staring at his phone. I moved a little closer, trying to see his screen. Just as I got close enough, his phone lit up with a text preview. It said, "Meeting confirmed." He swiped it away immediately and put the phone in his pocket. I tried to catch his eye, but he was looking past me, through the window, like I wasn't there. When the train reached our stop, we both got off. I followed him at a distance as we walked through the station. At the exit, he turned down a side street instead of heading toward the house. I hesitated. I wanted to follow him. I wanted to see where he was going. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the fear of what I'd find. Maybe it was the realization that whatever he was doing, he didn't want me to know. And that meant it was something that would hurt me. I walked home alone and found Olive already in bed. The sitter said Marcus had called and told her he'd be home late, that she should stay until I got back. I thanked her and paid her, and then sat alone in the living room, staring at the door, waiting for Marcus to come home. He didn't come back until after midnight. I heard the door open quietly. I pretended to be asleep on the couch. I heard him pause in the doorway, and I could feel him looking at me. Then he walked upstairs without a word. The next morning, I found a calendar reminder on the kitchen tablet. Marcus often synced his phone to the tablet so we could keep track of family appointments. But this reminder wasn't for Olive's school or a dentist appointment. It was for today at 10:15 a.m. The location just said downtown. I stared at it for a long time, my mind racing. What was downtown? Was it a lawyer? Was it a therapist? Was it a meeting with someone who could help him file for divorce? I heard Marcus coming down the stairs. I quickly closed the calendar and pretended to be making coffee. He walked into the kitchen, grabbed his keys, and told me he'd be out for a few hours. I asked where he was going. He said it was personal. I asked if everything was okay. He said everything was fine. He said he was just taking care of some things that needed to be handled properly. There was that word again. Properly. I asked if he wanted to talk about it. He said there was nothing to talk about yet. Then he left. I stood in the kitchen, listening to his car pull out of the driveway, and I felt a cold dread settling in my chest. He wasn't falling apart. He wasn't begging me to stay. He wasn't doing any of the things I'd expected. He was preparing, building something, and when he was ready, he was going to use it. 2 weeks later, I got a text from Marcus. It was short and formal. He said he needed me to meet him downtown at noon to sign some paperwork for Olive's school enrollment. He said it was time-sensitive and I needed to be there. I almost didn't go. Something about the message felt off. Marcus had never asked me to meet him somewhere for paperwork. We usually handled that stuff at home. But I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe this was his way of reaching out. Maybe this was a chance to talk, to finally start rebuilding. I dressed carefully that morning. I did my makeup. I wore a nice blouse. I wanted to look put together. I wanted him to see that I was trying. I drove downtown and parked near the address he'd given me. It wasn't a school. It was the courthouse. I felt my stomach drop. Why would he bring me to the courthouse for school paperwork? I walked inside, my heels clicking on the tile floor. The lobby was busy with people coming and going. Lawyers in suits, families with children, security guards directing traffic. I looked around for Marcus and saw him standing near the information desk. He wasn't alone. There was a man beside him in a grey suit, holding a leather briefcase. I walked toward them, my heart pounding. Marcus saw me and said something to the man, who nodded. As I got closer, the man stepped forward and introduced himself. He said his name was Richard Caldwell, and he was Marcus's attorney. I felt the blood drain from my face. I asked what was going on. I looked at Marcus, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. Richard handed me a thick envelope. He said I was being served with a petition for divorce and temporary custody orders. He said Marcus was also requesting a court-ordered paternity test for Olive. The world tilted. I opened the envelope with shaking hands and pulled out the papers. The words blurred together. Divorce, custody, financial protections, temporary orders granting Marcus primary physical custody, frozen joint accounts, a scheduled paternity test. I looked up at Marcus. My voice came out as a whisper. I asked what this was. He said it was what needed to happen. He said he'd been documenting everything since the night he found out about Connor. The text messages, the timeline, the witness statements from people at the party who saw us leave together. My own admissions to friends that I'd been texting Connor for weeks before it happened. I tried to speak. I tried to say he was overreacting, that we could fix this, that we didn't need lawyers. But Richard interrupted. He said Marcus had made his decision, and all future communication would go through him. He handed me his business card. I looked around and realized people were staring. A security guard had moved closer, watching the exchange. A mother with 2 children was standing a few feet away, openly staring. I felt humiliated, exposed. I asked Marcus how he could do this to me. In public, in front of strangers. He finally looked at me then. His eyes were empty. He said I'd humiliated him in front of our friends, our family, our daughter. He said turnabout was fair play. Then he said that Olive would be staying with him and his parents until the custody hearing. That he'd already packed a bag for her. That I could see her during supervised visitation. I felt my knees go weak. I asked how he could take my daughter from me. He said he wasn't taking her. The court was protecting her. He said the evidence showed a pattern of selfish, reckless behavior, that I'd prioritize my own desires over my family's well-being, that the court agreed Olive needed stability. Patrice appeared from across the lobby. She walked over and stood beside Marcus. Then Juliet appeared too, carrying a small duffel bag. Olive's duffel bag. I tried to reach for it. I said Olive was my daughter. Juliet pulled it back and said Olive needed to be with people who put her first. Richard handed me another envelope. He said it contained a notice of frozen accounts and a schedule for the paternity test. He said I was required to appear at a lab next Tuesday at 9 a.m. He said if I failed to appear, the court would issue a bench warrant. I looked at Marcus. I begged him to stop this, to talk to me, to give me a chance to explain, to fix things. He said there was nothing left to fix. He said I'd made my choices, and now he was making his. Then he turned and walked toward the exit. Patrice and Juliet followed. Gerald appeared from somewhere and joined them. I stood there, papers in my hands, watching them leave. I tried to follow. I called Marcus's name, but he didn't turn around. He just pushed through the glass doors and stepped into the sunlight. The doors slid shut behind him. I stood in the middle of the courthouse lobby, surrounded by strangers. Some of them were still staring. A security guard asked if I was okay. I couldn't answer. I looked down at the papers in my hands. The petition, the custody orders, the paternity test notice. All neatly organized, all meticulously documented. This wasn't a breakdown. This wasn't a man falling apart. This was a man who'd been planning, who'd spent weeks gathering evidence, who'd quietly built a case while I'd been out drinking with friends who told me I was the victim. My phone buzzed. Caller ID, private. I stared at it, my hands trembling. I didn't answer. I couldn't, because I knew now that every private call had been part of this, every muted conversation, every locked drawer, every cryptic calendar reminder. The phone stopped buzzing. The lobby continued moving around me. People filed past on their way to courtrooms and hearings and other moments where lives changed. And I stood there, holding the proof that Marcus had never been weak. He'd never been broken. He'd been waiting. And now, I was the one left standing alone. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.